This episode is about a daughter-in-law who feels bored because her mother-in-law, who used to belittle her, is now too careful with her words in front of her. What could have happened? Let's find out together. Please subscribe and like our channel.
Hello. I've been married for 3 years and don't have any children yet. These days, it feels a bit dull, as my mother-in-law has stopped picking fights with me. There were times when I was so stressed by my mother-in-law, who was restless to belittle me, that I would vent to my husband. By nature, if someone attacks me, I try to give it back as much as I can. But it's tough to show my true self to my mother-in-law. At first, I felt a sense of unfamiliarity and pressure to make a good first impression, so I acted docile. Even if you have a vibrant personality, it's not common to fully reveal your personality when you first meet your spouse's parents, right? I guess I acted a bit coy, and my mother-in-law must have thought I was a docile person. My father-in-law is a person who shows no interest in what my mother-in-law does. Maybe he gave up because she is too peculiar. He never interfered or showed any interest when my mother-in-law said things to upset me. Although my father-in-law never gets angry or uses harsh expressions, he never stopped my mother-in-law. Every time my mother-in-law instigated me, my husband would look at me, not knowing how to react. Although I wished my husband would step in, I thought I could handle my mother-in-law. During my wedding preparations, there was some friction with my mother-in-law, but my husband and father-in-law stepped in to smooth things out. Despite my concerns about my mother-in-law, I trusted my husband and father-in-law and proceeded with the marriage. Not long after the wedding, my mother-in-law's provocations began. It seems like she was displeased with everything I did. She didn't express it much in words, but she always made me feel uncomfortable. When I went to my in-laws' house, not long after getting married, my mother-in-law made a comment while we were preparing a meal together. She said, "Since you married a capable man who graduated from a good university, you should treat your in-laws and your husband well." She spoke at length, but that was the gist of it. At first, I thought she was saying these words out of love for her son. But as I listened more to my mother-in-law, the bottom line was this: you are not good enough for my son, so you should humble yourself and live. The more I thought about these words later on, the angrier I became. I did mention to my husband that I was annoyed, but it didn't feel right to expect him to step in and handle it strongly. My mother-in-law has a close aunt. We had a meal together once. During that time, my mother-in-law spoke, as if she was frustrated that she couldn't put me down. On our wedding day, the guests made a big fuss about how handsome my husband was. But it didn't stop there. All the guests at our wedding said that the bride and groom were too mismatched. The bride should realize she's fortunate. The bride's parents should be good to the son-in-law. Everyone was saying this, and I was just speechless. The aunt asked her why she was saying such things, but my mother-in-law was so furious that she just kept going on. When my mother-in-law kept saying how handsome my husband is and compared him to a celebrity, I burst out laughing without realizing it. My mother-in-law glared at me. I told my mother-in-law that I couldn't help but laugh because what she was saying was so absurd. She had a surprised look on her face. She must have been taken aback, considering I had been acting demure until then. I told her that I married my husband not for his looks, but because I was not the type to care about appearances. If I were, I wouldn't have married my husband. There were friends of my husband who met me for the first time on our wedding day. I informed her that they had said to my husband, "How did a toad like you meet a princess like her?" At that, my mother-in-law's close aunt said, "I've heard that too," and laughed. After this incident, I felt more relaxed around my mother-in-law. Whenever she tried to belittle me, I responded with a sense of superiority. When she said things like, "You're lucky to have married a competent husband," I would reply, "There isn't much difference between my salary and my husband's, so why would you say that?" And when she said, "You're blessed to have kind in-laws," I retorted, "Are you frustrated because you can't put me down?" I had decided that if my mother-in-law got angry at my responses, I would cut ties and avoid seeing my in-laws. But, unfortunately, that never happened. It was unpleasant when my mother-in-law told me I was lucky to have married my husband, but it was also upsetting when she spoke about my sister-in-law Senu. My sister-in-law's husband was very good to his in-laws. He frequently contacted and visited them. Seeing him adjust to my temperamental sister-in-law and being so good to his in-laws seemed remarkable. But my mother-in-law thought it was only natural. When we were newlyweds, my sister-in-law was distant from her in-laws. Yet, her husband's kindness to our in-laws was undeniably impressive. But my mother-in-law saw flaws in him. She thought that he should be more caring towards my sister-in-law, since she was such a catch, but he fell short. She even criticized my sister-in-law's in-laws. It's obvious, isn't it? My sister-in-law and mother-in-law probably spent their time together criticizing my sister-in-law's in-laws. About a year after our wedding, I went to my in-laws' house over the weekend and found my sister-in-law there alone. She had left her home after a fight with her husband about divorce and came to her parents' house. My sister-in-law's mother-in-law had sent a gift to my mother-in-law, but my mother-in-law had neither sent a gift in return nor made a single phone call. When her husband asked her, "Can't you at least make a phone call?" my sister-in-law threw a fit. She was still fuming when she told us this story. Even her gentle and kind husband couldn't take it anymore and agreed when she suggested divorce. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law blamed everything on him. They wondered how he could agree to a divorce, even if my sister-in-law suggested it. I was speechless. If a daughter-in-law doesn't even make a phone call to her in-laws, let alone visit them, then it's impressive that they've been patient so far. Despite the husband being good to his wife and her in-laws, couldn't the wife at least make a phone call to her in-laws, who sent a gift? And my mother-in-law asked if she had no shame to not even make a thank you call to the in-laws after receiving a gift. She said it's natural that my sister-in-law's husband couldn't stand it anymore because my sister-in-law was being rude to him despite her mistake. She couldn't understand what confidence my sister-in-law had to act like this, given that her husband was far superior to her in terms of both ability and looks. She added that people would have no choice but to criticize my mother-in-law as the one who led her daughter to divorce, seeing as how she was blaming her son-in-law and even disparaging him alongside her daughter. My mother-in-law yelled at me to leave immediately if I was going to say such things. I told her I should be able to say these things because I'm also a daughter-in-law in this family. And it seemed like both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were unaware of their wrongdoings. I said that a daughter-in-law is also a family member. At that time, my husband, who had been sleeping in the room, came out to the living room because of the loud voices. He asked what was going on, and I told him that I was very upset because it seemed like my mother-in-law and sister-in-law didn't consider me as a family member. I told him that I should go home for the day, and we returned home together. When I told my husband everything that had happened, he just said, "Why are they like this?" After that, I still called my mother-in-law often and visited her occasionally. Although she clearly disliked me, she hardly ever said anything to upset me. I mean, if she upset me, she would only end up feeling worse. Sometimes she says things that make me feel bad, but I can handle it. I'm paying back more than I've received. Recently, my mother-in-law seems to be very cautious in front of me. So, I'm feeling a bit bored. My sister-in-law has been getting along well with her husband since their fight. I hear she's living quite humbly. I once said this to my mother-in-law. My sister-in-law has a bad nature, so you never know when she might cause another problem. You should guide her well so she doesn't get divorced. There probably isn't another daughter-in-law in the world. Who would say such a thing to her mother-in-law? Sometimes, I find my mother-in-law quite adorable these days.
Don't you think that people who lack tact and shame can commit serious mistakes without even realizing it? It seems to me that the writer is saving her in-laws. What do you all think?